All right, so tonight we're going to wrap up our review of the basic parts of a paragraph by talking about transitions and conclusions. By the end of tonight's homework, you should have an idea of what it takes to be at a mastery level for transitions as well as conclusions, and have gathered some ideas and some specific examples of those. So let's jump in. Don't forget that you are taking notes. I would highly recommend that you use the guided notes for this because I have a lot of things in the guided notes already, and if you're not using them, you may end up having to write more things down. And don't forget to use the rule of 5 so that you don't have everything down. You don't have to copy everything down word for word. All right, so transitions are those words or phrases which help connect the big ideas together without putting the big ideas all in one sentence. They're essential to really helping push the reader through the ideas. And so we want to talk about what those transitions are and what are some of the different levels of those transitions. So transitions should do the following. They should be effective. In other words, they need to work well. Throwing in a transition just because you're supposed to isn't really going to cut it. They also need to be natural sounding. A lot of times we get in the habit of using things like first, second, and third. And while those are transitions and they do work, they're not very natural sounding. And you always want the transition to actually help the reader through. If the reader gets caught up in what the transitions are and they're very noticeable, then maybe that's not the best transition to have used. It shouldn't distract the reader. So like I said, now that we're in 7th grade, we really want to start moving away from using first, second, third, and looking for alternatives to these. Being more sophisticated and thoughtful in our writing. In the guided notes for the transition and concluding sentences, there are a list of some example transitions that you could use instead of those. All right, so what does it take to be proficient advanced and to be at a mastery level for transitions? For proficient, you want to move beyond the first and second and third. We want to move beyond it. We want to use a variety of transitions, and maybe you're still using some simple transitions, but we really want to breaking out of that box of first, second, and third. To move it up to advance, you'll need to use a greater variety of transitions, that you're using more than 1 or 2 or 2 or 3, and that perhaps some of those transitions are now within the sentence instead of just at the beginning of the sentence. That shows a little bit better artistry in using the transitions in your writing. And of course the mastery level, which is where we really want to get to, is that we're really thoughtfully considering what would be the best transition. How are we going to connect this sentence to the next sentence without actually smashing the sentences together? Using the example transitions that are on your guided notes can be a good place to start, and the more practice you have with this, then the greater chance you have of being at that mastery level. All right, now we want to talk about concluding sentences. The concluding sentence is the last sentence of your paragraph, and here are some of the things that it should do. First of all, its first job is to make sure that the reader knows that the writing is complete. It also needs to be a very strong conclusion. You're really never going to get up into that mastery level without a very strong, clear, satisfying conclusion that makes you think, yep, that was a good ending. And we keep going in and out. Okay. The conclusion, one way to write one would be to have it summarize the information presented in the paragraph. That can be one way of doing it. Usually that's more on a proficient, maybe advanced level. Another way would be to simply restate the topic sentence but use different words. Again, that's going to be more on your proficient level, maybe advanced, depending on how you do it. But to get to that mastery level, you really want to have that clincher that encourages the reader to keep thinking about what you've written. And I'll give you some examples and suggestions of that here in a second. Something just to keep in mind generally, anytime you're doing a writing test, which you will be doing one in 11th grade that you will have to be able to pass in order to graduate, If your brain can only come up with 2 really good sentences, always use them for that first and last part of the paragraph, because those need to be your strongest sentences. You need good body details. You need good big ideas and same words, but you also need to have those good strong sentences at the beginning and the end. So here's some things that you don't want to do for your concluding sentence. And again, if you're taking notes on the guided notes, this would be on page 2 of the notes, and it's already written there for you. So you want to avoid anything that's going to be super obvious. This was my paragraph about, this is all I have to say, I hope you liked it, the end. Those kinds of things are kind of like you don't know what else to say, so you're just going to throw something in there really quickly. We want to avoid these at all costs. There are much better ways to end your paragraph. And you will not even be able to get proficient on your paragraph if you use anything like this. One way that you can help your reader know that the conclusion is coming up and can be a way to get away from that now I'm done with my paragraph sort of words is to use these kind of transition words that signal the conclusion. If you have the guided notes, you have a list of these already in the example transition section. So using actually or as a result, certainly, clearly, consequently, etc. These might be signal words to let people know that, hey, this is the last sentence and I'm wrapping things up. But be careful not to overuse them, because if you use the same one over and over again, it gets kind of boring. All right, let's look at our expectations. The pencil is kind of hidden there, but you do need to be writing this down. Expectations for a proficient level, if all you do is just repeat the topic sentence with one of those concluding words at the end, that makes it better than nothing. At least you have the understanding that there should be a concluding sentence. If you change the sentence up a little bit and add one of those concluding transition words, that will still be on a proficient level. So if you can't think of anything else, repeating the topic sentence with a conclusion will at least get you proficient, but you won't be able to get any higher than that. So the advanced is where you start to use a little bit more artistry. Rather than just repeating it or being very formulaic about it, you're starting to rewrite the idea in your own words. You're saying the same idea, but it's in a more concluding way. Maybe you're pulling those keywords out or using synonyms for the keywords, and those get repeated in the concluding sentence. But it doesn't really, it's not just a copy of the topic sentence. However, the mastery, and this is where we really want to be, is where you're going to end with an interesting so what. And the so what is something that's going to keep your reader thinking about what you're doing. If you're using the guided notes, there's a list of what a so what is. But essentially, a so what clarifies why the reader should care about your topic. It's a great way to end your paragraph because it really does keep them thinking. So this is what you have a copy of in your guided notes, all these different ways that you can do with some examples of how to do that. So if you're talking about how great your mom is and you want to write a so what about that, where it says, the first one says, what new understanding should the reader have about your topic? Okay, I could say, if it wasn't for my mom, my life wouldn't be as good anymore, or as good as it is. And that would be an example for that final so what. So you can go through it and read those and use that. Keep these guided notes with you while you're working on your paragraphs and such, so that you can keep this so what list and use that for your concluding sentences. All right, so that is the end of our quick little review of transitions and concluding sentences. We'll do more practices in class, but don't forget to make sure that you've finished your notes and that you've gone to sophia.org to finish the digital whisk, and make sure you press submit. And then you will be completely finished with the homework.